This is I think the fourth Media Economics and Entrepreneurship, it's the fourth installment of our speaker series here. And I'm very pleased to welcome Eduardo Hauser. Media Economics and Entrepreneurship, the initiative tries to examine how different forces such as technology and the market are disrupting and reordering the media landscape. Eduardo is someone who's really been at the confluence of that disruption and that disordering for some time. He is a veteran of legacy media. He was an executive at Venezuela in Venezuela. Then after that, he worked for a company that you might remember was called AOL. It's been in the news lately. He founded their Latin American operations. That background in technology and that experience gave him sort of an inside view and understanding of how technology was changing the media landscape. And that led to a number of things, one of which is his most recent project, which is called the DailyMe, which really looks at the ways that people are sort of discovering and exploring for content and tries to find a way for media companies to exploit and take advantage of that. So I'll let him tell you about the inner workings of the DailyMe, but I'm very pleased to have Eduardo here, and thank you all for coming. Okay.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. You can hold clapping out until after I speak, because you may find that there's not a whole lot to clap about at the end. But thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And thank you for being here and taking time out of your day to have this conversation. I congratulate you at the outset because you've taken the bold step of choosing a career where you will be frequently subject to scrutiny and where it's very, very hard and even harder to make a living. So you guys are very courageous, and I think we're all in the room have at least that in common. I want to provide you just a little bit of a visual sequence because I've been asked before, how is it that someone who studied law in Venezuela could end up running a technology company in the news domain? So just very briefly, connected with what the introduction that Gabe made is, I was born in Venezuela a few years ago, and I joined as a paralegal in their legal department, litigating cases that had to do actually with freedom of information. That's how I got started in the world of journalism, and that's what got me truly interested more in the reporting and the journalism side than necessarily on the media operations side. And I did that for a very long time until in 1999 I persuaded the man that I worked for to actually lend me $100 million so that we can start the operations of AOL in Latin America. And that is how AOL Latin America was born. It was born in 1999. It was a joint venture between my former employer at Venevisión and AOL. And in about 3 years, we started offering dial-up internet in foreign and exotic places like Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Puerto Rico, and we launched the U.S. Hispanic operation of AOL in the Hispanic market. I did that until 2005, and in 2005, I left AOL voluntarily. I had the option to stay, but chose not to. I somehow felt that I had overextended my stay, and decided to take a little bit of time off, and a mutual friend of Geneva and us actually persuaded me to join the Board of Journalism at the Knight Foundation, where I serve with a lot of bright minds, including Geneva. And it was then I really hadn't figured out or thought of DailyMe. I came to the Knight Foundation with a genuine interest in learning more about the world of newspapers. My experience to news up until that time had been mostly focused on the television side, not as much on the newspaper side. But every discussion that ensued at Knight was about how newspapers their business was truly getting disrupted by the internet. So my thinking was pretty straightforward. You know, I know a little bit about the news part. I can bring my technology knowledge to the world of news and try to at least get involved in the distribution part of it. The first name of DailyMe was not that. The first name of the company I will not disclose, because I've now come up with 2 names in my companies, and my colleagues have asked that I please do not name anything ever again. My naming skills are horrible, so I will not disclose what that was. If you guys want to find out, it's easy. You can query it, but I'm not going to disclose it. The name of DailyMe actually was Geneva's name. During a dinner in Washington, D.C., when I described to Geneva what I was working on, she said, "That is the DailyMe." And I can't believe that 3 years later, this is 06, Negroponte's book came out in 1994, possibly? Earlier even. I know he started to coin the term around 1992, but the book, being digital, came out, I think around 1994. I had read the book, and after having dinner with Geneva, I went back to my room that night. We were there on night's business, looked it up on Amazon, found the excerpt where he described the DailyMe and said, that is indeed the DailyMe. So I bought the URL for $350. That's the story. And then I wrote to Nicholas Negroponte. Well, I discovered that the trademark for the DailyMe was abandoned by News Corp many years prior. So the URL was sitting in Russia for $350. The trademark had gone abandoned by News Corp. But I felt a moral obligation to go to Negroponte and make sure that he didn't mind my working with his name. So I wrote to him. I didn't get a response. And then one time in Miami on night's business, I actually chased him to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, I won't go into the details. I said to him that I was starting this project. Swear to God. And he did not object. He found it amusing that I had been so persistent. And I sort of felt a moral obligation to share it with him. So we'll talk about DailyMe a little bit later on. And then it was, I think, largely in part my work at the Knight Foundation and DailyMe also. I was then recruited to join the board of National Public Radio. And at National Public Radio, I'm the chairman of Public Interactive, the area of NPR that actually deals with digital distribution, both on the music side as well as the digital side. And the reason I put that up there is twofold. One, so that you understand sort of my background. It follows a better logic than one might think. And secondly, that in the discussion, if I bring some of these examples to bear, or if you have questions that you believe pertain to these businesses, I'm happy to address those as well. So the subject that we're discussing today is complex, and anyone that comes here pretending to have the answer probably doesn't. I'm not going to pretend the answer, but I think sort of organizationally, I decided to do this along five lines of thinking. All of them with D's. I just thought it'd be fun. And I'm not going to pretend to have the answer, like I said. And if at any point it seems to you like I'm comfortable, think again. These are things that I developed purposely for here. I haven't discussed them this way before, but I thought it was a good way to organize what otherwise is a pretty complex topic, because we're going through very turbulent times. And in 1 week, you can go from AOL acquiring the Huffington Post to News Corp launching the deal to, I mean, it's just incredibly fluid. So it's hard to keep up. There's a lot of discussion around these ideas, and there's a lot going on. So I'll try my best to sort of explain around those 5 pillars where I believe we are in the news domain and what this means in order to engage news audiences. Beginning with story development, or as we were discussing a little while ago, content development with a partner of my journalist friends. I would say that it began with the democratization of content development. I would probably give credit to Blogger. So it's not recent. It goes back to 1999 when Blogger was started, and it was the first platform that required very, very limited knowledge in order to actually get self-published. It required no intermediaries, no fees, very basic technical knowledge, and in a very short period of time, you could get published. At which point, now the whole process by which we had traditionally, and people traditionally had gotten public, you know, whether it was news reporting or their views, had just been turned on its head, and we didn't know to what extent. We know now, many years later, 12 years later, well, it was acquired by Google. I think the number is 50 million, but I put check there because I didn't have a very reliable source. But 12 years later, it's the 6th most used service on the web. It reaches 13% of internet users around the world, and it's used by about 10 million people daily. And in a slide that I will show you about content creation and the amount of data that's getting stored every day, I'm going to give Blogger a lot of credit, although I don't know exactly how much, but between Blogger and YouTube and Google, to really contributing to the amount of content that's flowing onto the web on a daily basis. Similar concept, except this time does not as much with text or with pictures, but YouTube. The impact of YouTube and how YouTube made it so easy for anybody to go online with a video. It's just something extraordinary. So we've now seen 2 tools, free, widely distributed. They happen to be both purchased by Google, where somebody can get self-published in a matter of no time, with no cost, with very technical knowledge, and just put content on the web as a means of generating content. Facebook is another great example. And in this particular case, I found this quite interesting. I found this last night. That process by which content is getting developed is working in a way that I had just never seen prior. This happens to be my sister. She works at CNN. So a couple of nights ago, I go onto my Facebook account, and I noticed that she had posted a message here on this post about Maria Jose Carrascosa. Now, I should tell you, I don't know who she is. I now know her story. I don't know if she's right or she's wrong, but this is a Spaniard woman who came to the United States, married a man from New Jersey, divorced him, took her daughter back to Spain, got full custody of her daughter in Spain. A court in New Jersey gave custody to the father, and she returned from Spain to New Jersey to present the papers that gave her custody of her daughter and was put in jail. So this is a very polarizing case that has people divided. I think it's heading up to the Supreme Court for a conflict of jurisdiction. But the point of this story is that I don't know how my sister came up with this story, but she's asking, she read the whole story. She had read 4 pages of comment, and it was Facebook, the tool she used, not only to become aware of the story, but also to begin a conversation with people around the story and develop a package for CNN. So back to the way of content, how content is getting developed, not only begins with tools that are free and require very little technical knowledge, they also open the door for a type of conversation that just did not happen before, and that makes it possible for people that come from traditional media to become engaged in a conversation and source a lot of the work they're doing from a tool like Facebook. This is another service that I don't know if you're familiar with, but when we thought that all these self-publishing tools were out there, actually there's great tools coming into the market on a daily basis. Storify was mentioned in a conference that I attended last week of alternative news weeklies, and I started to use it there. They claim to be a lot more easy to use than I found them. Maybe it requires a superior technical knowledge than I have. But essentially what happens is you can use any of the services here on the left-hand side to identify content that you literally drag from the left and put on the right to create a story stream. Now, this is pretty much as far as I got. This is Leonard Brody of The Examiner describing how the brain of millennials are different from people with Generation X. And the impact, this is a thermal scan of a millennial's brain as compared to ours. And the point of that presentation was how the flow of information for a millennial impacted neuronal development to make them smarter. And they do seem smarter. I got to tell you, if you've spoken to them recently, they do feel a lot smarter than me. But anyway, the point of this is how it's not only Blogger, it's not YouTube, it's Facebook. It's also the fact that there are some very smart people in very good places that keep coming up with ideas to make the process of publishing and developing content that much easier and that more interesting. Now, much better than me, I think this is Jim Brady's outfit, TBD, or was until recently. But this is the stream that they created for Snowpocalypse. So they were essentially aggregating assets from a myriad of sources, images from Flickr, search results from Google, conversations from Twitter, posts from Facebook, and with very little effort, essentially creating an entire vertical that got published under their banner and covered many, many different perspectives with many different assets of the Snowpocalypse weather storm up in the Northeast. So the key here is just the disintermediation of distribution has made not only the process of content development incredibly cost-effective and very free, but has also made it possible for people to just pour content onto the web in ways that are unprecedented. So much so that, just to give you a little bit of perspective, in 8 years, the amount of data that is stored, it does include a little bit of replication, but the amount of data that is stored on the web, according to IDC, has grown 53 times. And if you guys are wondering what an exabyte is, figure that is the number 1,228 followed by 18 zeros. That is the amount of data that is currently being stored on services that are supporting the World Wide Web. And behind all of that, of course, this is a proxy for the amount of content that's being poured onto the web on a daily basis. Content that, in some ways, we're competing with. And that's part of what the discussion that I'd like to have. So the second aspect that I wanted to bring to your attention is the question of discovery. How is that content discovered? Because it's very hard to sift through 1,228 exabytes of information and to discern what in there is important, what of there is interesting, what is worthy. So we come in traditional media very much accustomed to an editorial pyramid, a system that's highly hierarchical, and this could vary from organization to organization. The Wall Street Journal might have been one way, Knight Ridder might have been a different way, but we essentially had a pyramidal structure where reporters were creating content and developing stories, creating stories, I should say. They were supported by copy editors, by fact checker, by editors, management, and it all became a funnel that essentially defined the content creation process, funneled it, and essentially exposed it to the public. And essentially two means of discovery were prevailed until not too long ago. One is the editorial discovery process, where very smart people who knew it all, in fact knew so much that they would spot errors in a restaurant's menu, would actually decide what gets published, when, how, for whom, how is it curated, and puts it out there. And the second one was just purely human discovery. In conversations around water coolers discussing the events of the day. Along comes Google News. Well, I should say Google beginning, but then Google News. And if I had access to an internet connection, I had a short snippet of the man who started Google News, who described the process by which he started Google News. But all of a sudden, humans are completely out of the equation. There's not a single human at Google who decided that that Egypt's leader story should be there, that this story about Hosni Mubarak should make it to the top. There were several factors that determined that that story was there, and it's a thing called NewsRank. Are you guys familiar with PageRank? So PageRank is the algorithm that Sergey and Larry came up many years ago that essentially determines the importance of a page, primarily by looking at inbound links. The popularity of that page seen through the eyes of other people linking into the page. So this man, who I think I have here, Krishna Bharat, came up with a modified algorithm that he calls NewsRank. And instead of only looking at the inbound links to a story to determine popularity, they looked at things that you guys might find more relevant for a news story, including the quality of the source, the length of the story, the timeliness and the relevance to a subject, and then aggregates it onto something like this page here, which creates an immediate vertical talking about all of these things that are covered in the news, at least until last night. Green Bay Packers, Hosni Mubarak, etc. And on the left, things that I've actually proactively chosen to follow. So all the stuff, the release of the Google executive. So one might think that this is there because it's Google News. Well, it's not. It's because of the timeliness, and it was published by a reputable source. In this particular case, the Wall Street Journal, of all people. And that's what made it there. So we go now from a process where content is primarily discovered through the human eye to a content where content is brought to the surface by an algorithm, by a pure mathematical process of discovery, beginning with search. But search was only the beginning. Does anyone recognize this page? Do you think where I got those images from? Does that sound familiar? What is it? Amazon. The king of the recommendation systems. So if you guys have ever gone into Amazon, if you have an Amazon account, there will be very few elements that any one of us sees in common. The entire page that we see when we go to Amazon is distinct for every one of us. And it's because Amazon has gone through an extraordinary effort in order to capture signals from everything you do on their pages. Stuff that you've viewed, stuff that people you know have viewed, stuff that you have put in your watch list, stuff that you have put in your cart but have not purchased, stuff that you have purchased, and they use all those signals in order to aggregate other pieces of content that they feel would be relevant to you. So in this particular case, I was not logged and I had cleared my cookie. So Amazon knew nothing about me. But Amazon knows what other customers are looking at right now. So these are things that are trending in terms of popularity. And they also know what are the bestsellers from their digital cameras, which is the same principle that a lot of companies that operate in our domain are using in order to beginning to organize the news. So the page that is in front of you is, I think, about a week old. The New York Times had played in the field of personalization for a long time, My Times really never took off the way they would have expected to. So the way they're coming at this is taking an approach that's been followed by us, followed by Amazon, and followed by others as well, which is to take a look at the stories I've read in the past 30 days, identify that I read mostly stories about world news, that these are the most popular topics within world news, and then create a page with recommendations for me and not for anyone else. So this is now taking the science that Amazon has mastered and applying it to the field of news in order to create recommendations for each person based on very sophisticated algorithms. Another example is CNN, an area within CNN called News Pulse. Now, the difference between the New York Times and News Pulse is that this is based on a personalized recommendation that has determined that I'm a reader of world news and aggregates these stories. This one, on the other hand, is based on popularity. So if you see the way that stories are ordered here, you have a pretty standard navigation, which in some ways is funny because it's kind of duplicative from the navigation at the top as well as the sidebar. However, the order in which the stories appear here is in direct correlation to the number of times they've been viewed. So it's another algorithmic way to organize stories, but based on popularity. Now, it doesn't mean that these algorithms don't make mistakes. What you see there is actually what I saw when I logged into my account, and I can guarantee you that my interest in Hannah Montana is low. There might be other things on the page that I have a greater interest, but what happens in this particular case is that, as is the case in anyone here who has children, unless they have their own credit card, they use their parents' account to buy stuff on Amazon. And in this particular case, my daughter's Kindle is connected to my Amazon account, so every purchase she makes on her Kindle makes it onto my Amazon account. So Amazon thinks that I am interested in all these things. And when I open my Amazon page, the recommendations are way off. They're probably very good for her, they're not that great for me. But smart as they are, here's what they've done. They allow the user to correct the algorithm, right? So if I go here and I say, fix this recommendation because I'm really not that interested in sugar and spice, then I will come to a page like this where it says, look, we are recommending the Goddess Book Camp because you purchased these 3 things. Now, little do they know that I did not purchase them. I'm paying for them. It doesn't mean that I purchased them. And they give you the opportunity to rank it, or to say this was a gift, or do not use it for recommendations. And if you actually engage with this feedback process, the quality of the recommendation goes up very, very high, and it becomes very, very accurate. Another one that you might recognize, Dig, not entirely unlike the CNN News Pulse, but unlike CNN's algorithm, this one is also based on popularity, but the popularity in this case is expressed by a voting system. It's not expressed by the number of times that a page was viewed. It's expressed by the number of times that somebody has dug a story. So the way that they're organized here, and notice how it's not always descendant. In fact, it is because these are adjusted by time. And I don't know in any level of intimacy if you guys know what's behind the Dig algorithm, you might have a better explanation. But this is essentially some weighted average between the times that a story has been dug, and it's adjusted for time. The Uber recommender, the one that everybody talks about, Twitter. Twitter is many things. Twitter is a platform for conversation, for getting rid of authoritarian governments. It's a tool for many things. But it is a fabulous recommendation system that is not based on popularity, that it's not based on votes, that it's not based on your previous story, is based on the people you know. And at that chat, where I show you the thermal scanning of a millennial's brain, one of the arguments that was made, and I was researching who made it, I don't remember, but I'm going to try to find out, is that one of the reasons why Facebook and Twitter are so important is because the future success of a young person in life will be directly tied to their social graph. And you might wonder why. The argument was made that the social graph will determine what information comes your way. How educated do you get? Which stories are recommended to you? Which job opportunities are recommended to you? What people are you connected with? So now we're not looking at popularity. We're not necessarily looking at algorithms. We're looking at the social graph phenomenon, which is the people that you are connected with and what they have decided to bring to your attention. Now, the things that are being done around the social graph in terms of process that data, organize the data, and create algorithms on top of that is just extraordinary. It's remarkable. And I'm happy to engage in a conversation around that if you'd so like. Facebook, same thing. I won't spend a whole lot of time here, other than to tell you that back early next year, according to one report, Facebook now drove more traffic to websites in general, including news websites, than Google did. And this is truly extraordinary. And hence, I think Facebook now has a valuation of about $50 billion, with what's reportedly only a $2 billion in revenue. But then again, valuations are another subject for conversation we'll talk about. That's why, because of the importance of Facebook, that despite people's recommendation that Julian Assange be voted the Time Person of the Year, our friends at Time decided to override the first 9 recommendations. So they put the poll out there. They wanted people to opine on who should be the Person of the Year. The founder of WikiLeaks, followed by the president of Turkey, were actually voted higher than Mark Zuckerberg. However, the editors of Time magazine decided that Mark Zuckerberg should be the Person of the Year. I don't know if you guys knew that, but a lot of people that I've talked to had assumed that he was elected to that position when, in fact, he came in as number 10. Not that he doesn't merit being there, but actually the popular opinion was another one. I'll speak very briefly, and it sounds like a plug. Maybe it is. So this is what the work we do. One field that we believe will be very important in the field of content discovery is personalization. And when we started DailyMe back in 2006, my colleague who's in the corner of the room there, Neil Buddy, Neil and I were in a meeting yesterday. I invited him to come along, in part because I thought he could enrich the conversation a great deal. Neil was the head of Yahoo News and also the founder of the WallStreetJournal.com. So, Neil, raise your hand so others can see you. But so when I persuaded Neil that I had a better project than Yahoo News, we got together essentially with the argument that personalization would be a big phenomenon in content discovery. And 4 years later, I'm happy to report that people of the type of Google and Facebook think along the same lines. Some made more muted statements, and I'm going to have to add here former CEO. Well, maybe not until, what is it, April? April or March? Pardon me?
Still has a title.
I think he becomes chairman, right, and not CEO. But the folks at Facebook have actually made it much bolder. And the argument that the COO has made is that media that is not personalized in 3 to 5 years will be an anachronism. So I'm going to walk you very, very briefly of what's the kind of work we do. And I think at some level persuaded Gabe that I was worthy of bringing here to speak to you, because this is the conversation that him and I had at the Wall Street Journal conference back a few months ago. So when somebody first arrives at a website, people know very little about that individual. And more often than not, that person came in via search. So the website that's receiving the visitor doesn't know a whole lot. Actually, we met with a company yesterday that actually does a lot of work on that search query. So by the time the person comes into the site, that query has been processed in order to capture some knowledge about that person. But absent that, there is very, very little knowledge about that person. What we do, our work involves capturing the URL that person has viewed, always working with non-personally identifiable data, all anonymized, capturing the URL, applying semantic processing to the content of the URL, and then extracting metadata out of that story. And with every click that person does inside our network, we begin to build an understanding of that person's affinities and that person's interests. So we call that the affinity graph. It is the measure to which I am interested in baseball, technology, Apple, Google, etc. And once we believe that the recommendations around profile data become very interesting after one person has clicked on 3 stories. Because now we've accumulated sufficient data points to begin predicting using statistical models. Someone who has looked at all those books that my daughter had seen is also interested in these other things. So that is how we've applied that same science to the field of news discovery. And once we have that person's profile, we have the ability to look at all the assets that person could be exposed to and determine what is the asset most likely to be of interest to that person. So that is the work we do. Now, why do we do that? Well, because part of our theory is that if you look at a site like the New York Times or the homepage of the New York Times, there are 223 hyperlinks on the homepage of the New York Times. And the content of the page refreshes every 10 minutes. So to some level, I stand a better chance to winning the lottery than I stand to find a story of particular interest to me on the homepage. That's not to say that I'm not going to find great stories. They're going to be great stories, not for me. They're going to be good stories for people like me. And back to the recommendations, that's a little bit of the thinking in the New York Times and why they're launching this comprehensive system for recommendations. The page that we've published as a test of our technology, the areas that are shaded in gray are personalized. They would not be seen by anyone other than me. The navigation on the left are the things that come out of my profile. They are entities, subjects, and topics that the system feels are interesting for me. And these are the headlines picked by the system for me using the same kind of science that I was showing you before that Amazon has used for e-commerce, essentially. And the content that makes it onto my homepage is based upon the profile the system has on me, where in this particular case, it thinks that I'm interested in gadgets and Latin America and real estate and so on and so forth, and these organizations and these geographies. And if the system is correct, I can confirm it. If the system is incorrect, we're working on a way to have those signals removed. Which is kind of a nice segue to speak about data, because the role that data is playing in the field of content presentation and discovery is unlike anything we've seen in the past. It began, and I'm sure Geneva will remember this, with a company founded by Adrian Holovari. That's the first example. It's not the first time that data is used for content discovery, but it was the first sort of serious concerted effort in Chicago to do a mashup of a Google map with crime statistics that were public at the time, and would give people a view of how crime was performing in the city of Chicago, which then became the foundation upon which this company called EveryBlock was founded, and I think it was later acquired by MSNBC, and it's become the backbone of their strategy for local news coverage. So local news, as you guys know, is incredibly hot. Everybody's trying to go after local news, in part because the local advertising market is very lucrative. People are using different techniques to go after local. So if you take a company like AOL, they built this network called Patch that has a network of contributors in a bunch of cities in the US. I think they claim to be up to 700, if I read correctly. And they contribute stuff. This one is more based upon data about your neighborhood, about your zip code, and its adjacent areas. And this is, in fact, what EveryBlock looks like in Los Angeles. Now, it was a little harder for me to discern if this was of interest, if these were relevant, but it does give you the ability to explore the city through the view of 89 neighborhoods, 165 zip codes, and 9,900 streets. So that has become their drill down method, and that is the way that this system presents you with stories. So data widely available. I don't know if Gabe knew, but there's this system called PQ. Has anyone used PQ? Normally, I would tell you to go check it out. There's one caveat. The moment that you search for your name or for a friend's name, you created a page that previously did not exist. So on that first query, I did it myself, and the following morning, I got a Google alert saying there's now a page about you on PQ, which I kind of regret. But anyway, there's a ton of information made public. In fact, I'll give you a very small. So I was involved in a car accident about 3 weeks ago. I wasn't hurt. My car was pretty banged up. The police came. They lifted the report. They asked for a form. And thinking that if the police wanted to call me, I wanted to give them the right number, I give them my cell phone. Big mistake. The police report goes into a public database. The public database gets shared with marketing companies. And for about 2 weeks, I was taking calls from chiropractors and PI attorneys who were offering services so that I could profit from my car accident. Point of that is that the availability of data makes it possible for you guys to know a lot of information about Gabe, a lot of information about me, and if you drill a little deeper, now notice how mine, now let's see, this is a peak score of 1 out of 10. That is the system's interpretation of how much data it has about me. I think this is 124 out of 10. This is Gabe. It still has you in New York. It has you working for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, okay.
And then, if you start drilling a little deeper, you end up at a place called Spokio. that will actually show you my address, my age, how much I make, what my house is worth, the members of my family, and things of that sort. And other embarrassing details. So there's a story you might have heard about. At one point, I think Spokio was crawling the public wish lists of people on certain services, including Amazon, and apparently some stuff started to surface about people's adult entertainment tastes that probably others would have wanted to keep private. And I think, although a little different, that widespread availability of data, that widespread availability of documents give rise to things like WikiLeaks, where there's now a transactional system for data and for information that brings it to the public, that people can layer on narrative, investigation, reporting to really create a source content in a way that was never done previously. How are we doing on time? I'm going to speed things up a little bit. The next area, how are we doing in terms of pace? Are we okay with pace? Too fast, too slow, by a show of hands? Fast this way, slow this way?
You're good.
Good, okay. The next one is delivery. So, little corny slide, but illustrative nonetheless. Two devices that were constrained by physical reach and which required, to some extent, a government approval for content to come into the device. Onto a world like Yahoo, where Neil spent his previous 5 years. I don't know that anything that you see here might surprise you until you start thinking like Yahoo, for example, is the #1 website seen at places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Iran, or Nigeria. And the list goes on. It might be #3 in the US, but it's incredibly more influential in places like Taiwan and Hong Kong. The visitors by country, not surprisingly, are 32% in the US. However, notice the number of people from India that visit yahoo.com. So the point of this slide is to talk about the geographical reach, where you could be a reporter sitting in Santa Monica, publishing content for Yahoo, not necessarily aware that what you're putting on the web is goes to the #1 source of information in a place like Taiwan or Hong Kong. The Times of India, as a good example. The Times of India, I could not validate what I'm going to say to you independently, but I have been told that in the US alone, the Times of India has 40 million uniques, and that is bigger than the New York Times, the USA Today, and any other news publication whose name we might be more familiar with. So again, this is an example where a news organization based out of Mumbai, I believe, is putting story every day. Now, granted that the demographics of people who go to the Times of India might be quite concentrated, right? It's people that normally would gravitate to the Times of India as a source of information. However, being highly SEO optimized as it is, don't be surprised that you go to Google News, you type a query of something that you're seeking for, and you end up at a site like the Times of India. Devices. Another very disrupting, good in so many ways, but very disruptive in terms of the models that we're accustomed to in terms of where does content end up. And the iPad, of course, because it's just a magical device. I'm kidding. That's a plug for Jobs. It's a very good device. It has great battery life. It came up with an interface that I don't think anyone else could have come up with. Incredibly intuitive. I have a nephew that's 3 years old, and he can use the iPad in ways that I did not think possible. And if those news organizations that understand the power of the interface and the application of the device, including News Corp, that, as you may know, about a week ago launched the Daily. Now, the interesting thing about the Daily, it's funny because did you guys see the news conference? It's interesting to see Rupert Murdoch in action. It's quite interesting, in fact. And one of the things he said, my entire company has been funded with a little over $7 million. So I think somebody from Forbes asked the question, how much you're investing in the Daily, and he says, it's only $30 million. And it's run on a very tight budget of only $500,000 per week. And I'm thinking, wow, I run my company on that per every 6 months, I think. But anyway, the power of the Daily is that it captures the capability of the device in a way that makes it native to the device. You have a device that has a GPS. You have orientation. You have an intuitive interface. You have the ability to interact with stories and bring out video, bring out audio, explode things that truly feel like they're jumping out of the device. But at the same time, you're either looking at the daily or you're playing Angry Birds, right? So what it means is that that device, and that's the quote John Miller actually used when he introduced the daily, is, while it's a great device that will allow you to bring content to the surface in very interesting ways, the fact is that it's competing with 2 billion other 2 billion is the number that have been sold, but it's competing with every other application that actually resides on the device, including Angry Birds. Speaking about, there probably was a more elegant term. I thought of dinero in Spanish or dough, but I couldn't find another way to talk about money without the D, and that's how we agreed to get started. Quick recap. So the point of what I've said to you so far, number one, there are free tools that make it very easy for people to both publish content with very low entry barriers. Number two, the discovery process is not only democratic, but is fully aided by machines and by algorithms, by mathematics. Number three, data is widely available, and it's foundational in the process that stories are getting developed in our time. Delivery is unbound by geography. The medium is not subject to regulation. I guess you could argue that connectivity, there's a fair amount of regulation in connectivity. But unlike radio, unlike television, they're not subject to government approval purely for operation. And the devices are a dominant force. The consequences, therefore, are that we have a very fragmented medium, an incredibly dispersed and fragmented medium, where a company like Blogger only reaches 13% of internet users. And in fact, if you start thinking Huffington Post, for example, how much users they reach 24 million uniques in a month, where I think the entire, universe of news consumers in the US, I think, is 140, 150 million uniques. So even a company of the magnitude of the Huffington Post is really only reaching a small segment of the population because the sources are just incredibly fragmented. That makes that the audience is dispersed. Access to information is free. I'd strike mostly free. It's free. We've gone from a dispersed, we've gone from a highly concentrated model to a hyper-targeted model. If you recall, the way that newspapers made money was just incredibly ineffective. So I can't share the numbers. I don't know the numbers that well. But so if you're a car dealer, you would advertise in the whole run of the Sunday paper. You were trying, maybe it had a run of 300,000 editions. There might be 100,000 people that ultimately read the section where you were advertised. There might be 10,000 that got to your page, and with luck, 10 or 100 people would actually make it into the dealer, right? We are now looking at a model that's hyper-optimized, thanks in part to all these data sources and technologies that are powering digital media. But the model, however, is still largely based on the old and the traditional media model. So very briefly talking about the model, this could be something that you all know. If you don't, we can discuss it either now or later. But this is more or less how a news website makes money. You want a lot of traffic, right? And you want it from all possible sources, from direct visits, from search, social media, inbound links. Any source of traffic is a good source of traffic, which ultimately becomes, very simply, your number of visitors. And that is a very important metric for news organizations that operate digital. The second things that you look at are engagement. And there are sort of soft metrics, like how long they spend on a site, how many visits do they do in a certain period. That could be by week, by day, by month, etc. But ultimately, what you want to get to is how many pages were viewed by your visitors. Because the number of times that a page was opened will determine how many units of advertising inventory are available for you. And that is the currency of digital news. How many banners can you sell? How many sponsored links can you sell? Which become money, actually, with two words that you may have heard. CPM, how much money do I get 1,000 times that I display a banner? And what is the sell-through rate? So is my inventory sold at 100% or is it sold at 50%? Is ultimately how a digital news organization will make money. I see, because of the model is so incredibly inefficient, I see sort of a second wave of attacks on the traditional model. So we've now gone from coupons to Groupons. The growth rate of Groupon is extraordinary in terms of revenue. I'm glad that I'm not a venture capitalist who was exposed to Groupon, because I have not only passed, I would have laughed. It's great that it's going to bring me a daily deal. It's doing so by email, of all things, at a time when supposedly young people don't read emails, where they get caught up in spam filters. But the proposition is so compelling that I think the numbers are private, so I don't know the numbers well, but it's supposedly the company that took the least amount of time to get to $1 billion in revenue, is what I've heard. It's not a hard metric. I don't know that to be a fact, but the growth is extraordinary. And it's nothing but coupons. It's coupons mass mail to anyone that will sign on for an email. We go from media demand to demand media, a company that IPO'd maybe 2 weeks ago, and for a brief period of time was more valuable than the New York Times. I think when I checked last night, the market cap of demand media was something like $1.5 billion. And then one that I've been trying to digest for the last 48 hours is the acquisition of Huffington Post by AOL, which in my mind, this is a company that prides itself on being the internet newspaper. They're not a digital media outfit. They're not a social media outfit. They are the internet newspaper. Now, the internet newspaper reaches, I think, 25 million uniques, reportedly had $50 million in revenue in 2010, barely turned a profit, and yet it was worth $300 million in cash plus $15 million in equity for AOL, a company that has made some big mistakes and has made some very bold moves and has had a lot of successes as well. So it's funny because I put the two mastheads here, the two brands at the top, sort of to think, so what is it about these two that make it seem so different? Because the Huffington Post is not pretending to be a social network. They're not they publish blogs, but what they are is an incredibly effective traffic machine that has learned to leverage search engine optimization and social media in a way that no one in the content field, I think, has learned how to do. And if that permeates through the rest of the entire AOL organization, I think they stand to make a lot of money. Now, I don't know, and we were discussing briefly before the presentation, what's the overall strategy of AOL, but it was definitely a very bold move. My interpretation of this is what's being rewarded by the market is definitely scale. Scale is important. Size does matter. Connectivity, not in the traditional sense in terms of dial-up accounts, but rather how do you connect people, how do you connect assets, how do you connect stories. Practical innovation. And practical innovation that ultimately has to be connected with an effective business model leading to profitability, which is different from something that's usable. Twitter is incredibly useful for some. However, in the investment community, the big question is, how will they make money? My guess is they eventually will, but the way that they will use to get there is still a little unclear. Have we seen this elsewhere? Without a doubt. We went from physical devices to play music, to democratic ways of sharing the news, albeit violating the law, until we finally found a transparent, highly effective market for downloading disaggregated songs and creating custom playlists. What's going to happen here? I think we've already moved out of this. We've already gone to the effective market for repackaging the stories. The question is, what will be the model that brings it all together and that allows participants in that market to actually make money from what they do? A couple of closing thoughts. So you're at the school. You made a very bold move. You went into a domain that's not all that popular nowadays. However, I would argue is still paramount, because behind all this technology and all this data, there would be nothing without content. However, we do have to think, and I'm going to probably describe this better in the next slide, is what are the skills and what are the tools in order to play in this domain. And I've listed them there. I don't need to go through all of them. I think the presentation will be available afterwards, because I think I've run somewhat afoul of my time, and I want to do open the opportunity for some examples that I just thought I'd bring to your attention. Not all of it is being done by Huffington Post in New York. There's some incredible examples of people with an entrepreneurial spirit that aggregated their area of expertise and did those very successfully. Perez Hilton, the guy, Mike Arrington, who started TechCrunch, and much closer to here, Sharon Waxman, who started The Wrap to cover the entertainment industry. So there's my contact information, Gabe. I'm sorry that if I feel like I'm rushing, but I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And
super. Thank you, because this does allow for some questions. So I'd like to open it up to the crowd to ask Eduardo. You can just choose who you want to call on. There's a poor person who didn't even get a seat who's sitting down there. You can stand up now to ask your question.
So one of the things that a lot of people are talking about in the journalism world is the concern that this personalization of news will lead to and the search engine optimization of news will lead to content that is chosen merely because it's popular rather than because it's important. And I was wondering what can be done, or what you think is being done to give news organizations leverage over choosing content that they feel is editorially important.
Yeah. My sense is that one will not eliminate the other. My sense is that they will learn to coexist. In my point of view, there's always going to be room for the editorial discovery, the serendipity. I would argue, if I had connectivity, I'd be tempted to fire up the browser and look at what HuffPo has now. So yesterday they thought their merger with AOL was important. Today they had genuine coverage about the crisis in Egypt, and whether or not the president's departure last night would lead to the government getting replaced. So I believe some of these outfits are as concerned as you seem to be with that the important stories making it to the top. Now, they've taken an approach that's aggregating the stories from other sources and in some case writing them. But I think ultimately what we end up is with a very diverse market, highly fragmented, where you're going to have the Drudge reports, that have a political bias, and they're very opinionated, and they aggregate only certain types of stories and organize them according to that agenda. And you're going to end up with Dig, which skews technical, and stories are displayed based on the reader's popularity. So my sense is just the market is opening up, and you're going to end up with the New York Times is still going to be around, and there's going to be The Deal, and there's going to be Dig. And they will all be competing for your attention. And ultimately, you're going to end up going to the one that you feel more comfortable, I think.
Piggybacking on this idea of personalization, the concern that I see that maybe most people aren't highlighting, except for maybe one author named Jerry Monnier, data harvesting. And it's the idea that, I'll give you an example first. So I have a friend, I've done some work for LA Times Online. I have a friend who works for LA Times Online. He did a crimes map just like the one you showed in the example. Now, when he was discussing the process of building that, he said one of the most interesting facts, and mind you, to give you background, he's a journalist, finished his bachelor's in journalism, but now he's a computer programmer, focusing on Django and Python and those kinds of languages. But when he was describing the process to these other computer scientists, he was saying that the original data set that was given to him, and this was given by public records from LA County about just all of the homicide reports, was around 40% accurate. No one had ever questioned that because there was no sense of maybe accountability as to actually producing good data, or there's no sort of sense of computer programmers having to do an excellent job because, again, there's no accountability. So he said that what he had to do was really tweak that to make it a little bit more accurate, and then from there he was able to sort of, from his journalistic integrity, say I could deliver this online and make it relevant. I don't think many people are sort of maybe doing that with such, keeping that such top of mind. And at the same time, I wonder, my question then is, if the future is for an Annenberg storyteller to meet a Viterbi engineer and get together and make amazing applications, then does a Viterbi engineer need to follow the same integrity as a journalist here?
You would hope. I mean, taking your example of the LA County records, anyone who went to those records and built a story based on those facts would have had them wrong. So the fact that they were being aggregated at a database level, or that they were being reported by a human, and that there was a narrative built on top of those records, the underlying data would have been wrong anyways. The difference with what your friend did is that it took a person to sift through the records, identify the inconsistencies, and correct them. And you would hope that there will continue to be people doing that. And you'd hope as well that there would be people building the layers that make that data, that process that data and do something with it. Because I would argue that before every block, and again, I'm not defending them particularly, I hardly know them, but I wonder if he would have known that those records were wrong before they were actually processed by machines to identify the errors. So it's a yin-yang, I would argue. I mean, you're still going to need underlying accuracy in the facts. If you're lacking accuracy in the facts, I'll tell you another story. Do you remember, was it United Airlines that saw their stock drop by something like 60%? So if I understand what happened correctly is, was it someone at Bloomberg? It was Bloomberg, right?
It was an old story from a daily in Virginia, I think it was.
Exactly, but I think somewhere in the, I'm not sure if it's Bloomberg. I seem to recall that it's Bloomberg. In the system, the story was given the improper date. The moment it was published, it was picked up by the search engines. The moment the URL became public, all the algorithm-based trading systems began to trade the stock of United Airlines, and I think made it drop an extraordinary amount in just a single day. The mistake was the improper dating of an old story that triggered chaos for United Airlines, at least for one day.
Sure. So maybe leading to another question then, because you brought up the social graph. And this author, Jean Lanier, talks about how people at this point they believe in algorithms so much that they've even lessened themselves as intelligent people, hoping that the algorithm knows more than they do. And it's a fantastic book if you haven't read it. But anyways, a little crazy at times, but good. But the thing is that with this social graph, again, maybe my question is, does the university now, as an institution, an accredited institution, need to step up and say, we need to build a system of standards or a set of practices that sort of ensure academic integrity with data? Because I don't know if data is being sort of seen as you bring up, bad data to begin with will create bad data at the end result.
Right, if the input is wrong, the output is wrong.
Absolutely,
right?
And so many programmers think in terms of abstraction layers. So they build they use a language, and then they create a framework, and then they create modules for this framework, and they put data into these modules. And their algorithm may work beautifully, but again, there's no system of checks at the input, and then again at the output.
I think you cast it with the way you cast the question. You're obviously concerned, rightfully so. What makes me optimistic, and I tend to be just an optimist generally, is that what we're seeing now is computer programmers finally found, a way to get into the world of media. And journalists are finding a way to get into the world of computer science as well. Now, chances are that if you, and I don't know your background, maybe you're a PhD in computer science, so maybe you can write a very good algorithm. There might be other people who were purely trained in journalism that might not succeed writing an intelligent algorithm, a well-formulated logic. My sense is that the more that those disciplines cooperate, the better the outcome. Now, that does not mean that they're going to be able to fix LA County's records.
Well, I mean, that's probably...
We have so little time.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is there
I don't know who had. So, you and then you, ladies first. Okay. You go.
I read a piece on Reuters this morning that the opinion columnist thought that the HuffPost AOL merger or acquisition was going to kill the New York Times paywall. And I was wondering what you think about the fact that with all of the DailyMe stuff and the fact that you can go anywhere and have personalized stuff, and on Twitter you choose who you follow, on Facebook your friends are your friends, you're getting a certain, I guess, some of your news is being censored just based on who you know, who you follow, things like that.
I'd say filtered.
Filtered, sure.
Yeah.
How do you think paywalls in the future are going to affect all of this?
So how many people currently pay for an online publication in this room? Seven or maybe 8 if I miscounted. Can I ask you to say what is the publication that you pay for?
Global Post, and then I get stuff delivered to
Global Post.
Global Post?
Economist.
Economist? Wall Street Journal?
I just downloaded the Daily.
You did? Free for another week or so. Will you think you'll pay after?
I don't know.
There are very smart people that will make smart arguments on why paywalls should succeed. I don't see people doing it. So I'm concerned that paywalls will actually yield the benefits. Now, economically, you might make an argument that if you lose 90% of your traffic, which actually costs you money, that you could stand to make more by servicing 10% of the traffic. I'm not sure. I've never been involved in building a paywall. Neil was directly involved in launching the Wall Street Journal's paid version. Is this one area that do you mind if I punt it to you? And I'm not hugely optimistic, A, and B, I'm not sure that the two are related. That you'd have to make sure that that content never makes it onto the open web, right? That it's fully withheld, and you go back 15 years.
I guess the question then remains, are people going to go for quality? Or are they going to say, the New York Times is the kind of quality I want to pay for, just like the Wall Street Journal?
What would you do?
Or, I pay.
You'll pay.
Pay for it. But I think that then the other side is, well, I can get my personal DailyMe everywhere else. So that's, which one is going to trump?
What's your view, Neil?
I mean, there's going to be a small number of people who are successful charging, but it's mostly going to be in, certain content areas like business and finance, or really good, high quality content like The Economist or Global Post, or in specialized business areas like Variety. Those sites, those sources, there's enough people, enough demand for that content that people need to do their jobs, or they just enjoy it enough that they're going to pay for it. But the vast majority of general news is going to be, there's going to be enough alternative sources, it's going to be hard to charge for more generalized news content.
Yeah.
Because there's too many alternative places for people to go.
I think I'd agree with that. I'm sorry, we had the gentleman in the back.
I wanted to ask how privacy concerns might threaten what you're saying is shaping up to be the future. And I mean, if people got a right to have like a do not track list or do not track me, kind of, how would that affect, or do you worry about that at all?
Yeah. Look, I think first people need to be given the choice. I mean, if you don't want to be tracked, you shouldn't want to be tracked. You shouldn't be tracked. Now, it makes me I wasn't given a choice to keep my cell phone private when I filled out a police report. So I think that question of privacy operates a little differently in terms of how that information gets disclosed. If you choose not to be tracked, the information that is displayed to you on sites that use behavioral tracking and whatnot will be less effective. And it'll make the ecosystem a little less effective. There does seem to be a preponderance of browsers moving in that direction, where the default programming is do not track, or at least not to accept third-party cookies. My sense, and your question I believe is connected to yours, that what is likely to keep this ecosystem lubricated from a financial perspective is making it effective. Making it effective means using data. A subset of that data is behavioral data. And I think what we have to be concerned with, I would argue, is not that the data is not collected. I would argue that you should know who's collecting it and what it's being used for, and that you give the ability to manage that data. We, in our little thing that's DailyMe, we did so. So if you go to that page called My Newstagram, you see, like Amazon, what we know about you. You have the ability to opt out, and you have the ability to correct the system. I would prefer to see, and I'm a little biased, as you might imagine, but I would prefer to see a universal system that does something like that, rather than a system that is either imposed by law or some other way where the data is just excluded. Because I think it, again, I think it's a lubricating factor in this mechanism. Does that make sense?
High quality content costs money, and as I was looking at, the lowered bar of entry for creating content, the really high bar of entry for creating content is the cost of creating content, and high quality content is very expensive. As I'm looking at everything you said, it seems like the money for that content is there's no answer in there for that shrinking money for content creation. And it's very depressing to just see all the algorithms are running things. There's no, I just don't see any answer to that problem.
I say Google it. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, in everything you said, I'm just like...
Go to Quora.
Yeah. Where is that? Where's the solution for that problem?
Taking an economics approach, I would make the following argument, at least at a high level. If you have more people than ever before consuming that content, if you have the possibility that more people than ever before will find what you write, then I think there is at least the foundation upon which this economic system is built, at least foundationally. What I think we're seeing is a highly disorganized market because it's early, because you have journalists doing programming, you have programmers doing journalism, you have algorithms interpreting data. it's very turbulent. It's very unclear. And it may remain unclear for the next 25 years, hopefully less. I think that the market will organize. I think people that write quality content will find places that want to host that content. If they limit their audience, if they limit their inventory to high quality, there will be a premium paid by advertisements, and only a certain brands are going to make it onto that site, and the site is going to make enough money to pay for it, right? But the problem right now is that the market is not as organized as it should be. We're at the first stage where it's just becoming blown up. It's very democratic, it's very transparent, and very fluid. Hopefully what you're going to see are some organizational principles where things get clustered and categorized, and they find their place in this huge, vast domain that is digital publishing.
I'm afraid that we have to cut it off here because we're out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming. Remind you that we do have other M2E speaker events throughout the semester.
Hopefully better than me. So it's kind of good to be there wedged in the center. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And if you have individual, I put up my information there so you can reach me individually.
Okay.